I would have hoped that the basic operation of American democracy, and in particular the basic integrity of America's elections, would not be a topic that we would have to come to the Senate floor to worry about. But the character down the road in the Oval Office is making all sorts of threats to the cornerstone of America's democracy, our elections. I'll mention three. First, he nonstop lies about rigged elections. He can't bear to face the fact that Joe Biden beat him by millions of votes fair and square, and so he invented a story of rigged elections. Well, as has repeatedly been shown, if any election has been rigged recently, it was Donald Trump's first election, where study after study, report after report, showed that Russia had been messing around in that election, using covert influence operations to influence American voters and steer them towards their favorite, Donald Trump. But the lying about rigged elections is a bit of a warning sign, because the other thing we've learned about Trump is that his accusations tend to be actual confessions. The bad stuff that he intends to do, he announces by accusing others of doing the same thing. So when people notice the mischief that he's up to, he says, well, everybody does it. That doesn't make it anything other than a lie. Then, he has been out bullying Republican states to try to get him more seats in Congress by doing mid-season gerrymandering of their states. This succeeded, kind of, in Texas. When I say it succeeded kind of, it succeeded in the sense that they got the gerrymandered districts. But here's the rub. When you gerrymander more Republican districts into a state, you make the freeboard, the win ratio for each of those districts, a little bit less. And if yesterday was any message, Republicans need to worry about a wave election washing away Trump's poison and nonsense. In a wave election, those gerrymandered districts that you thought you'd moved into the Republican column could get sunk in the wave. In particular, we've already seen from yesterday's results, more analysis will follow, but that it looks like Latino voters, important in Texas, are abandoning Trump. So it may be that Texas's gerrymandering blows up in its face. And wouldn't that be a nice turnabout? Maybe that's what Republicans in Indiana were thinking when they refused to gerrymander their state. They might well be looking at Texas and saying, you know, voters in Texas might actually have cared more about electric bills, about their homeowners insurance crisis, about their cost of living, and wanted Texan legislators to do something about that instead of going off on a partisan gallivant to redistrict the state. And those voters might just hold those Republicans accountable for choosing as their priority to use gerrymandering so that politicians can choose their voters instead of paying attention to the voters who want help with costs, who want their homeowners insurance problem solved, who are concerned about their electric utility bills, and who are sick to death of what's happening with grocery costs. The third avenue of attack on elections by Trump is that he is modeling government election interference in front of our faces right now. When you send the National Guard into American cities, when you deploy masked, plainclothes, presumably ICE agents, to yank people off the street and fling them in unmarked vans and disappear them, you are getting people used to images that Americans are not used to. You are inoculating Americans against that kind of abuse of both military and law enforcement capabilities. So that when it's election day, and that kind of nonsense takes place around polling places to discourage voters, we've gotten used to it. So the lying, the constant lying about rigged elections, the bullying, the constant bullying to force state legislatures to gerrymander, even though that's not what their voters want, and the constant modeling of government interference in elections, all of that is a signal that we have to be on our guard to protect our democracy. It's not just Trump. In doing this, Trump has allies. He has allies on the packed and captured Supreme Court, a court that Republicans packed and captured specifically to help their big, creepy billionaire donors acquire more power in American democracy. And boy, have we seen enough creepy billionaire power in American democracy. Dark money, the secret, sneaky, dark money floods that are poisoning our elections, that allow billionaires to channel multi-million-dollar contributions into races, hiding behind front groups and screens and super PACs, so that voters can't do their duties as citizens of figuring out who is telling them what. Because the loudest and noisiest and most prolific messages are coming from behind masked entities. It was one of the dirtiest deeds ever done to our democracy, and it was done by the Roberts Court. Voter suppression, making sure that white legislatures could discourage Black and Latino voters by changing the rules for who you can, when you can vote and how you can vote. We passed a Voting Rights Act in the Congress to stop that kind of behavior. And this Supreme Court, the Roberts Court, has been diligently pulling out piece by piece of those Voting Rights Act protections. And when they do, what happens instantly? Those Southern legislatures go to work to make it harder and harder for minorities to vote. Hundreds of bills get filed. Third, when they were confronted with partisan gerrymandering, distorting Americans' right to vote by letting politicians pick voters instead of voters pick politicians, they said, oh, well, that's all fine. We're not going to look into any of that. Courts are not allowed to look into whether gerrymandering is legal or illegal, constitutional or unconstitutional. Those three decisions, flooding our elections with corrupting dark money, letting state legislatures make it harder for certain people to vote who they don't want voting, and gerrymandering districts against the will of the public. People hate gerrymandering. Those three things have collectively done immense damage to our democracy, and those bad decisions are going to play out in this coming election. I'll close with a point about all three of those cases. The Citizens United case that let filthy, unlimited dark money pollute our elections. The Shelby case that tore down an essential element of the Voting Rights Act. And the Rucho case that allowed uncontrolled partisan gerrymandering. All three of them share a very important characteristic in common, and that is they hang on a false fact. To get where the court wanted to go, those Republican appointees had to make up a false fact that the decision hung on. In Citizens United, it was that all the unlimited money would be transparent. Well, we know that was false. Every $1 billion in dark money that falls into our elections proves that was false. In Shelby, it was that things had changed. You didn't need to worry about Southern legislatures trying to keep Democratic voters from showing up. But you saw that that was false because all those laws were immediately passed to suppress voters. And in the Rucho case, it was courts can't figure out gerrymandering stuff. It's just too complicated. But in fact, courts were figuring it out. It's not even that hard to figure out. The court just made up falsely that this was too hard. When a court is making up false facts to get to an outcome that it wants, that's not a sign of great integrity in those proceedings. So we have a lot to worry about, and we have more to worry about after yesterday, because last night showed that voters do not like what Trump and his Republican cohort here in the House and the Senate are doing to our country. This was a small wave, and with any luck, it is building to a bigger wave. And instead of adjusting to popular opinion, what we know they're going to do is to try to use even more tools to corrupt democracy, corrupt elections, and defeat our ability to have the American people decide who they want to lead them at the polls. That is the predicament we are in, and it requires us to be on high alert. I yield the floor.